Hey, Facebook fam. Hey, hey. I'm going to give a moment for notifications to go out. Yes, happy Black Friday. I trust that everyone had a great and peaceful Thanksgiving. This morning I was up early and working on I'm working on a new project, a writing project, doing some writing. And it came to me to stop. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the topic, a little bit about the topic that I am writing about. I am writing about caregiving. Yeah, writing about caregiving. For those who don't know, I have caregiving is near and dear to me. Caregivers are near and dear to me. It is it's I have been a caregiver a couple of times over at this point. And so I wrote a book. The irony is I have my book anniversary for care get from carefree to caregiver, which was my very first solo book that I released. That was this month, and I forgot to even post about it, mention it. But yes, that was November of 20. I released that November 2018, and that book went on to do really well. Won an award, became an Amazon #1 bestseller, and all of that. But beyond that, from carefree to caregiver changed the trajectory of my life and my ministry, particularly because as a result of from carefree to caregiver, I began to support caregivers in a more meaningful way, having cared for my mother, my grandmother, my godmother, and created a support group, an online support group here on Facebook called Caregivers Connect. And I'll drop that link if you are a caregiver and you watch this or know of a caregiver. I would certainly invite you to join the group because it is a great community for caregivers. But in any event, I wanted to talk a little bit. Some new statistics have come out about who caregivers are because there's misinformation everywhere on every topic, right? But a lot of times people think that caregivers are only caring for parents and that in order to be a caregiver, you only live with, your loved one has to live with you. Not so on either front. And so I wanted to just share some data about who caregivers are and then talk about how you can support caregivers because a lot of times those who are not caregivers don't necessarily know how they can support those who are. So, a couple of stats that I wanted to share. One is that 53 million Americans, adults in our country, are caregivers. 53 million. Stats show that that's actually 1 in 5 people. So for every 5 people that you know, one person is a caregiver, at least one. If you know, of course we know more than five. So again, for every 5 people that you know, one person is a caregiver. That should help shrink your thinking of how broad, like, oh, I don't know any. Yes, more than likely you do know somebody who is providing either some physical, financial, care, support. It could be meal preparation. It could be transportation, transporting them to a doctor, to appointments. It could be them living physically with you or with the individual. It could be taking care of their errands for them. But those are among some of the top responsibilities of a caregiver: paying their bills, helping to pay their bills. There are a number of things that caregivers do. And so 53 million, 1 in 5. Beyond that, 59% of caregivers are caring for a parent. But that's 59%. A lot of times folks get caught up on that they're caring for an elderly parent. 59% are, yes. But 31% of caregivers are caring for someone else in their family. There is more information out there, for example, about children who are autistic or who have who some would call special needs. As they grow, if they're not able to perhaps live on their own or be completely sufficient, self-sufficient, then their parent still then may be their caregiver. So that's an example of one who is caring for another loved one. And then I know caregivers who are caring for spouses. There are some whose loved ones have mental illness or other situations, developmental delays, and they're caring for them. Caregivers also may be caring for siblings. So again, 31% are caring for other family members. And then there's 10% who are caring for a neighbor or a friend. And the interesting part is, as I read that information in that particular stat, I realized I've fallen in all three of those categories. One was my mother, another one was my grandmother, and another was my godmother. So sometimes you're a caregiver multiple times over. That's another thing to be mindful of. And then caregivers, 59% are female. They're working women. 59% of caregivers are working women. But then 41% are men. Don't sleep on the brothers. But shout out to all men and women who have taken up the charge to become caregivers, to be caregivers. And then there's a growing segment of our population of caregivers who are millennials and now Gen Z. Because in some cases, you're as I was when I'm Gen X, but as I was at the time, 20 years ago, helping my mother, well, more than 20 years ago, helping my mother care for my grandmother. And then in some cases, grandparents have raised the grandchildren. And so the grandchild becomes the primary caregiver as the grandparent ages. Things to consider about who makes up the caregiving population. I want to also share with you some things that, and I forgot to mention, November is National Family Caregiver Month. November, this month. So I wanted to, it just hit me as I was again writing this morning. I wanted to come on live. I've shared a couple of posts about this in writing, but I wanted to come on live and just share some information about caregiving and caregivers. Caregiving impacts, and I can say this firsthand, it impacts your life. It impacts your life from a vantage point that 43% of caregivers report sleep issues, report challenges with getting to sleep, report not getting enough sleep and enough rest. And so I dealt with that to the point where I would get anxiety if my phone rang after 10:30, because it had happened so many times where it was the nursing home calling and something that happened with my mother, if they had to take her to the emergency room or something was going on, I got anxiety when my phone would ring, and I started having difficulty sleeping. 43%. I was one of that 43% who was having sleep issues. I think it's important to share this because caregiving can be an isolating. You can feel isolated. It's a lifestyle that can isolate you. You can feel alone. And while I was in the journey, I didn't necessarily have the wherewithal to look up information about caregiving and to realize like, oh, me too. Oh, you too. Oh, okay. I'm not the only one that's going through this. 36%. More than 1 in 3 caregivers, this is really, really serious, report having battled depression. Yeah, depression. Burnout, depression, feeling like, because you were isolated, because you perhaps are not getting enough rest, because you're running and doing so much and you're not getting proper nutrition and proper care for yourself. And sometimes you let your own health fall to the wayside. Because of all of those things, caregivers then become depressed and burned out, and in a lot of cases they don't get the level of care and support that they may need while they're on the caregiving journey. So with all of that in mind, let me give you a quick sneak preview. What I'm writing about today, what I was writing about for this project, is I'm going to talk about the courage to care. Because one of the things that I've realized, and I hear a lot from other caregivers in my support group, is that sometimes caregivers also deal with the anger of the fact that others opt out of caregiving in the family. And so they feel again alone, they feel isolated because others have simply opted out and say, oh, you got this, not realizing the breadth and the magnitude and the depth of what you got, what you're leaving on my shoulders, the monkey that's on my back. And for me, I was an only child, so it was me. Thankfully, I had wonderful family members who were cousins who were supportive. But for others, caregivers just feel like others opt out. And so when we think about care, that's an emotion, that's a feeling. And then giving, the fact that caring prompts a caregiver, the fact that I love you, the fact that I care about you, then I'm moved to give a part of my life, a part of a caregiver's, they give their life to literally support the life of another. And to do that on an indefinite basis, because, there's not a timetable. Oh, well, if you only do this for, can we do this for a week? Can we do this for a year? It's done indefinitely. So I wanted to, again, shout out to all caregivers out here in the Facebook world who may see this. Shout out to caregivers. I applaud you. And every journey is unique. Your journey will not be like my journey, and my journey won't be like the next person's journey. But as you navigate through the waters and the journey of being a caregiver, I want to applaud you today, because it is a very difficult and demanding role that you take on, and especially when you're doing it and you're giving up your finances, you're giving up your time. So I want to applaud you. And then for those who watch this who are not caregivers, I want to ask you, as we close out the month of November and National Family Caregiver Month, I want to encourage you to consider how you can help. That, again, 1 in 5. That 1 in 5 of every person you know is a caregiver. Consider how you can help a caregiver out. And you know what? Timing is good because it's Black Friday. So consider how you can bless a caregiver even for the holidays and beyond. I got a couple of ideas for you. I'm glad you asked. How can I help a caregiver? Glad you asked. One, caregivers spend about 26% of their income on the person that they're caring for. 26%. Now, if you in church and we talk about tithing, and some people struggle with tithing and giving that 10% of your income, think about that multiplied. 26% of a caregiver's income is devoted to the person for whom they're caring. It may be medical supplies, it may be additional food, it may be equipment, whatever, gas to get to the appointments. 26%. Let that marinate. And then secondly, so with that in mind, rather, I would say if you can be a financial support to a caregiver, do that. Simply cash app them sometimes, Zelle them sometime, put a little change in the caregiver's hand. You may be the loved one, a family member who says, I don't have the capacity to help my sibling or whomever it is in my family who is the primary caregiver. But what I'll do is I'll start to be a financial support. I'll start to be a financial blessing. Or just as a friend, maybe you can just be give a little financial support for Christmas or for the holiday. Do that. Secondly, that I was offered in terms of how you can support a caregiver. Think about maybe paying for some respite care, paying for a day off for the caregiver. Because in many cases, particularly if the loved one is living in with the caregiver, they don't get days off. There's not a day off. This is Thanksgiving weekend, right? This was today is Black Friday, but caregivers, they get a day off in many cases, even if they don't live with their loved one. I know for me, although my mom was in a facility, I was also consumed on holidays with, I need to be there, or I need to make sure that things are happening for her so that she enjoys the holiday. And so that's what I consumed my mind with. I may have been off from my paying job, but I was not off from the caregiving responsibilities. So, with that in mind, if there is some time that you can, pay for, there are paid caregiving businesses. There are businesses and entities who will handle caregiving responsibilities for a loved one. If they're already giving 26% of their income, can you perhaps pay for a day so that they can take a day off? Or can you devote your time and say, hey, I know that mom, dad, I know today I'm off. So I'm going to give you a couple of hours to go and have a you day. Go do a spa day. Go get a manicure, pedicure. Go take a walk. Or I'll sit with them for 2 hours so you can go get a walk in. Something. You don't have to do it all, but do something to support other caregivers. Respite care, help them financially, or give the gift of time. Give a caregiver the gift of time. That's it. That's my Tara talk for today. Help a caregiver out if you know a caregiver. And if you are a caregiver, know that Teraleen, absolutely is applauding you for the journey that you are on. I know sometimes you can feel unseen. So I want you to know that you are absolutely seen today and that you are applauded. I believe that caregivers are among the unsung heroes of our society at this point. They really are. You do so much that goes unnoticed and unseen. Your social life takes a hit, but you keep it moving and you keep it pushing. But I also encourage you, caregiver, when you can, take some time for yourself. But I applaud you for having the courage to care to the point that you don't just care in your heart, but you care by giving care and giving love. That's it. Have a wonderfully blessed rest of the day. Peace.